just talking about work-life balance. You have to have time. Like I mentioned before we started recording, you asked me how I was doing. I was like, I just got off work doing 10-hour shifts and they wanted me to do 12. Well, the last couple of days they was like, hey, we need you to do 12. I'm like, no, I'll give you 10. You know what I mean? Yeah. So even having that balance, even in that, it's like, look, at some point you got to cut it off. And so I was like, all right, I'll give you 10 the last couple of days. Maybe I'll give you 12 tomorrow. But no, you're only getting 10 right now.
Turn this up. Turn this up.
Your professional development is one of the keys to your career success. When you combine your desire to grow with actionable steps, your journey to success becomes an incredible reality.
Hi, I'm Paul Faronbi, and welcome to IncrediPaul Leadership, where we learn how to become the most incredible versions of ourselves by learning from each other. Today, I have the honor of having Earnest James on the show. He's a man with a heart for people as a minister, mentor, and speaker. Ernest has dedicated his life to inspiring and uplifting others. He is an author, podcaster, speaker, and workshop instructor. He has been a guest speaker on several different podcasts and even hosts 2 of his own podcasts as well. So that was a little bit about you, Ernest, but introduce yourself the way you would do it.
First of all, thank you for having me on. Again, my name is Earnest James, and generally I just like to say I'm a person who loves people. And so most of the things that I do to help other people. I think that's the biggest way to be blessed is to not so much worry about yourself, but to be a blessing to others, and then the blessings will return. And so as you said, I'm a podcaster. I have 2 podcasts. My original podcast, which is the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. We are as of recording on episode 120, I think.
Wow.
So then my second podcast that I started, which is called the Girl Dad Discussions podcast, which is a podcast that I started to kind of combat the narrative of the fatherless daughters and, fathers that are missing out in the lives of their daughters. And there's a whole story behind why I even got into that field. But I do have one daughter myself. And so on that podcast, I have conversations with other fathers talking about their relationship with their daughters. And then now I've started having daughters on talking about their relationship with their fathers too. So that's what we kind of do that. Got some other podcasts in the works also. So that's me in a nutshell. I'm also stepping into the public speaking arena. Have done some speaking engagements and have some lined up to go into other schools and maybe some more corporate things that I've been able to do just to get into that thing. But like I said, at my core, I'm a person who just loves people and loves to help people and like to see people win. So that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, you love people and you stay really busy too. It sounds like between the 2 different podcasts.
It sounds more busier than it is,
Well, yeah, you said you might be a longer conversation, but talk to me about this Girl Dad podcast. You said it's for fatherless daughters. How did you come up with? What made you want to start that podcast?
So, a couple of years ago, I was going through some issues in my marriage with my wife and I, and when I started to really pay attention to the things that we were having, or the conflict that we was having, I realized at its core, it came from a difference of upbringing, right? So I was raised in a 2-parent household with my mom and my dad, and she was raised in a single mother household. And so that fatherless daughter and the things that kind of come with that, as we came together as a family, me with my daughter from a previous marriage, and then her with her sons from a previous marriage, and having this blended family, we started having some challenges, and
not easy.
In the midst of that, so in the midst of that, I started looking at my dating history, and I realized that every woman I've ever dated was a fatherless daughter. And so I figured, for whatever reason, either I'm attracted to them or they're attracted to me, but we keep coming in contact with each other. And so being the person that I am, I said, well, how can I help this community that I'm connected to for whatever reason. And so I started a page on Instagram called Friend to Fatherless Daughters. It's actually still up. It's called Friends to Fatherless Daughters. And so I just went on and I was giving my point of view from a father, from a man, and from a brother, because I have 5 sisters. So seeing that relationship with my dad, with my sisters, and all of that, putting all that together. So I started this page on Instagram called Friend to Fatherless Daughters. And so I would just go on and I would just talk about fatherless daughters and, giving my viewpoint and tips to help and things that I believe that could be a benefit to them. And people start calling me and asking me to be on their podcast. And so I had never been on podcasts before. I'm like, oh, okay. And so I did one. That one turned into 2. Before you knew it, I was at like 6 or 7 out on guest appearances on other people's podcasts. And that's actually how my podcast started, because one of the podcasts that I was on, I met the guy in person, because it was kind of like this, a virtual, and I met him in person and we went out to lunch and we were having a conversation over lunch. And he was like, I think you need to have your own podcast. And so I was like, okay, I'll think about it. And fast forward 120 episodes. That's my podcast. And so one of the things, because of the work that I was doing with the fatherless daughters and that space, whenever I would have a father on that had a girl dad on the podcast, on my original podcast, I would always start off with 2 questions. What does it mean for you to be a girl dad? And what is something that your daughter has taught you? I always started with those 2 questions. Okay. So over the episodes of having this, having different fathers answer that question, and you're getting the different answers and really enjoying, the conversation, I said, well, let me just turn this into a full podcast by itself. And so that's how the Girl Dad Discussions podcast was born. And so now I think we're on maybe 20 episodes, recorded episodes for that podcast. And like I said, maybe 120 for the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast.
Are you looking for a place to continue to grow and develop, especially in your leadership? How about connecting with others who feel the same way? Hi, I'm Paul Faronbi, aka IncrediPaul, and I've got great news for you. The IncrediPaul community is for people who desire to become the most incredible versions of themselves. The community is for individuals who are goal-driven and action-oriented. This community is dedicated to leadership and personal growth, especially in going deeper in your career, starting a business, or developing a business. Join me in becoming the most incredible version of yourself. Go to IncrediPaul.org/community to join the waitlist and sign up. INCREDI Paul.org/community. Join the waitlist. I can't wait to see you there.
And so on the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast, we actually talking about, my guests and I discuss topics and ways to help us to heal in every area of our lives. So I talk about the things that I've been through as, personally, and for the things that I haven't been through, I bring on somebody else who has been through some things and overcame it. And we talk about that to give the listeners, help and hope with overcoming whatever it is that they're dealing with in their lives. And so I just try to reach as many different topics as I can, in different areas where people are hurting and need healing and help. And so that's why I am with the podcast.
You are making a tremendous impact with what you're doing with the fatherless daughters, and just with the Deal to Heal, heal, and fulfill. I love how you break it down like that. You're really intentional about helping people who need it the most. And that is a big part of leadership, is being able to meet people where they are and not just really standing on top and trying to get people to come to you, but you're really meeting people where they are and you're helping them with different struggles and hang-ups and hurts. That's powerful.
Yeah. And I think it's, well, I know most of it part of was, I want to say heredity, but not heredity, but just the way I was raised,
It's in your blood.
From my mom, My mom was an awesome person, loving, caring, and she just had a heart for people too, and people were drawn to her. And I think I got a lot of characteristics and a lot of things from her just naturally that kind of have that same energy. And so, yeah, I have to give all props to my mom for that.
Yeah, shout out to moms. That's really cool. Really cool. So I know you mentioned that you did this and you didn't really see yourself as a podcaster at first, and now you have two different podcasts and more on the way. So what was Earnest James doing before all of this?
I was in the church. I was raised in the church. First of all, let me start there. Raised in the church. My mom was a pastor, that whole thing. And so I was doing that also. We actually started a church. I was associate minister at a church for like 10 years. And then me and one of the other associate ministers, he felt the call of God to start his own church. And he asked me to go with him to support him. And I did. And so he became the senior pastor and I was the executive pastor. For like 10 years. Like 10 years we were doing this. And so I was doing that, in the spiritual realm or a ministry realm at the church. But then my natural job, I'm a bricklayer, right? In the trades and working with my hands. Therefore, that's why the brick are behind me to represent for the bricklayers.
Representing it, yeah.
And then just being, just trying to be an example. Again, I was married and my wife had 4 sons from a previous marriage. And so definitely being a example to them, young men and to their friends. And that's a whole other side of, what I do and what I'm trying to do more of. I had actually started a male mentoring program right before COVID hit, and we were about to take it into the schools, and then COVID hit and shut everything down.
Man.
And so I'm actually in the process of rebooting that, but we're going to do it virtual. And then that way we're able to, keep it going. So, yeah.
That's really good. So how are you able to balance? You said you were working in the church for 10 years and you're also a bricklayer and then starting a podcast. Like, kind of talk me through like how all these things kind of came together.
Yeah. The podcasting came later. So the podcasting and the speaking in the schools, that stuff, that's what I do now. Okay. So when I've been a bricklayer for 17 years. Okay. Right. So that was already going. Again, I was born in the church. So I was in the church before I was in the trades, Yeah. So that was just normal, kind of normal, everyday thing for me, and even before I became a bricklayer, I guess I was always still working with my hands. I was still doing something like that. I was a machine operator, still am machine operator for years, outside of just building my own things with, just on my own. And so that's kind of went hand in hand together, until I became a bricklayer full time. But as far as the church, like I said, it was something I was doing anyway. So it just kind of came natural. I was already associate minister, already helping in ministry as far as, services and making sure everything ran the way it was supposed to run and things like that. So the transition from, being an associate minister to executive pastor was just more responsibility. Yes. But it was already something that I was already doing, anyway. So everything just kind of ran smoothly. The biggest turn was the pandemic, of course. That changed a whole lot of stuff, and more virtual things came, after that, which again, going in that same transition with my marriage was going through at that same time. And so that led me to, again, the fatherless daughter space and going to, into getting on Instagram with that, which led to the podcasting. And so here I am. We didn't actually kind of bounce back after COVID as far as the church. We were doing virtual. We still do virtual. But the physical church didn't really bounce back, after COVID. So we went to a virtual church, and virtual, you really don't need you don't need two pastors to run that, know. And so I kind of stepped down, and the senior pastor, kind of runs the day to day for now. So
Okay. No, I completely understand. So I was raised in the church as well. So I'm a person of faith. I say Jesus is first and I am second. So I have a great respect for ministers and pastors because I know it can be a thankless job at times that you give and give and give, but people don't always know what you're dealing with, what's going on. So yeah, I just trying to understand and unpack like how all that came together.
Yeah. Well, I know one thing you mentioned about balance, and when I was associate minister, I was an associate minister at a different church than my home church that I grew up in, right?
Okay.
Because I moved states. So when I moved out of state, I moved to another state. I joined another church. So it wasn't really into that church that I was in that I really kind of seen how to balance ministry and personal life by the pastor, right? Because growing up in the church that I grew up in, my grandmother was the pastor first. And then my mom became the pastor after my grandmother passed away. And so I lived with my grandmother for a couple of years, and before my mom became pastor. So I saw how that, how she operated and how it was like nonstop, and then after my grandmother passed away and my mom became pastor, it was the same thing, and so it's 9 of us as far as siblings. So it was times that we had to step in like, all right, this is when the phone calls stop, because my mom would just give. People would call all time, all kinds of, times of night, 1, 3 in the morning. I need to talk to Pastor James, and my mom would answer, if she, if we give her the phone. So we had to kind of step in and like, look, no calls after 10 o'clock. You know what I'm saying?
No,
like
if
something happened, then you got to call Jesus for yourself. You know what I'm saying? And so, but it wasn't until, like I said, I moved away, I moved states, and then I joined another church, and it was there that I seen the structure that was set in place. Like, my pastor had a secretary. And so on the weekends, he would take, not Sundays, but it was like Monday, maybe like Monday and Tuesday, I think he would take off. And then the rest of the, week he would be in the church. But on that Monday and Tuesday, you could not get in contact with him. The only one that could get in contact with him on Monday and Tuesday was his secretary, outside of the immediate family, was the secretary. And like, you call the secretary. If it's important, she would call the pastor. If not, then it will have to wait until Tuesday. Then he's back in the church, because the church was open all day. We had a lot of other stuff, programs and things going on that while the church was open. So it was open every day, pretty much. And so it was like, so the church is always open. He was always there. But on those 2 days, those were his off days. And it's like, you have to put that in place because people will constantly, they won't stop.
That's not
They won't stop. So I learned that then, and like I said, seeing firsthand of how when my grandmother was in pastor, it didn't stop. When my mother became a pastor, it didn't stop. And so when we started a church ourselves, we had that same structure. It's like, okay, this is the time, but we was a smaller church, so it was okay. Like, you can call whenever, we might not answer, but you can call whenever. We was a smaller congregation, but we still had to put some of those things in place. And even in our regular lives, just talking about work-life balance, you have to have time. Like I mentioned before we started recording, you asked me how I was doing. I was like, I just got off work doing 10-hour shifts and they wanted me to do 12. Well, the last couple of days, they was like, hey, we need you to do 12. I'm like, no, I'll give you 10. You know what I mean? Yeah. So even having that balance, even in that, it's like, look, at some point you got to cut it off. And so I was like, all right, I'll give you 10 the last couple of days. Maybe I'll give you 12 tomorrow. But no, you're only getting 10 right now.
Yeah, work-life balance is so critical because especially if you're in a high-stress job or really demanding job, it is really easy for people to take up all your time, all your energy, and you have to be really intentional about what you said with your pastor. He set aside Mondays and Tuesdays. I'm sure there were times that he wishes, because when you are a pastor or minister, you have a heart for people, so you want to help, but you also need to prioritize yourself and your family, and really your family is your first ministry there. So that's really critical, and I'm glad you're able to learn that from him and apply that in your life as well. Are you wondering what's next? Has everything you tried failed? Or maybe you just feel stuck? Then coaching might be right for you. The coaching relationship is a relationship totally centered on you. If you're tired of running on the hamster wheel of life and want to start to see results, reach out to IncrediPaul for help. So what are you waiting for? Go to IncrediPaul.org/coaching, IncrediPaul.org/coaching, or at I am IncrediPaul on all my socials. Or you can click the link in the bio for your free coaching session. I want to make sure you become the most incredible version of yourself.
Yeah. And even, like I mentioned, even in your regular life, right? So I was, during the pandemic, right? We did the pandemic. So the construction industry, or infrastructure as they call it, is essential, right? Yeah. So as a bricklayer, I was an essential worker. So I had to work. Well, outside of bricklaying, one of the other things that I do is home health care. And so the healthcare system got hit too. And so as a home health care worker, I also was essential. So I was working 2 jobs during the pandemic. You know what I'm saying? As a bricklayer and a home health care aide, taking care of people. Because like my clients that I took care with the home health care, we had 10 people on staff. But when the pandemic hit and COVID hit and people didn't know what it was and everything, and my clients caught COVID. And so, like I said, we had 10 workers. Everybody stopped coming to work. So it was only 3 of us that actually would still come to take care of the clients.
3?
Yes. And these clients are 24-hour clients, right? Wow. They need 24-hour care. And so we went down to 3. And so the 3 of us worked around the clock, between the 3 of us to take care of these clients during a pandemic. And like I said, I still was doing the bricklaying too. So that was the 2 jobs, like essential workers, and everybody else was sitting at home getting free money. And I'm like, man, I want to sit at home. You know what I mean? I want some free checks, but I had to go to work. So
yeah, it's why it sounds like you're twice essential on both sides with the bricklaying and with the home health care. I know for myself, I was working manufacturing and did a lot of projects, and for like a month and a half, I didn't travel. But then a lot of stuff like you mentioned with construction and capital projects, everything picked up because it's like, we need to get this done. So I was traveling nonstop for a long time, but the airports were pretty free, so it was easy to get through. Yeah. But no, that's really good. So I'm curious, because I know absolutely nothing about bricklaying, and I don't know how much my audience knows. If they're anything like me, they probably don't know much about bricklaying. What is something about bricklaying that maybe with friends or most people don't even think about that is just interesting about your job?
Yeah. So as a bricklayer, you have 2 types of bricklayer, right? We have what we refer to as an outside bricklayer and an inside bricklayer. Okay. Right. So the outside bricklayer would be the buildings that you see. So if you think of a school or a hospital or a jail or a prison, those are all built out of block or brick, right? So that's something that you will be able to see. So there was one big project that I worked on, Hobart High School in Hobart, Indiana, when we just did that a couple years ago, built that school. And that's also something that I like about the construction field and building those structures, because you can go back and say, hey, I built that, and it's still standing today. So that's one of the things I love about construction. Even before I got into bricklaying, I was a carpenter building houses. And so I was able to go take, one of my girlfriends at the time, we was working for a bank. And so the bank had bought this whole block. And so we just built all the houses on that block, and so I would just go there, drive her over there. I'm like, yeah, I built all these houses, and so that's what I like about the outside bricklayer, right? So then what you have what's called the inside bricklayer, what we refer to, which is refractory. So if you think about steel mills, gas plants, lime plants, glass factories, all of those things have furnaces, right? And so like when you did making steel, you have to melt the furnace. Well, you have to melt the steel, in order to be able to use it. And so you have to melt it inside of a furnace. And so those things people never see, because it's all, you can't take pictures and things like that because it's business, you know what I mean? So, but those are things that we do, and we go in, we build these furnaces and rebuild them and all of these things, but people never get to see that stuff, and so that's one of the things, like you got one part of your job that everyone gets to see, and then you got the other part that nobody gets to see except people that work there, and even some of the people that work there, like your regular workers, they don't build the furnace. They might run it, but they don't build them. But we build them. So we're able to see what's actually on the inside. All they know is steel goes in and lava comes out. You know what I mean? Because it comes out once it's melted, it looks like lava. So that's all they know. But on the inside, what's actually on the inside and how it works and building it, that's what we do. And most people hardly ever get to see that.
Yeah, you see it from the inside out.
Yeah.
That's really phenomenal. Well, kind of talk about the inside out and what you do with helping people deal, heal, and fulfill. What are some things that you usually work with people? I know there's a variety of things, and you said some of this stuff you have different people on the show focus on different things. But what are some things that you focus on and what you're really passionate about?
Well, one of the things that I'm really passionate about now in this climate is suicide prevention, right? And suicidal ideation. And I talk about that's one area of it. And then I talk about my own battle with it because of going through depression and things like that I had to deal with. And I'm very vocal about it because as men, a lot of times we hold this stuff in, right? And so, especially with the podcast and being on other podcasts, it's like, okay, I want to build these safe spaces for men, right? So they know, okay, it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to talk about how you feel and the things that you're dealing with, the things that you're going through, instead of holding those things in. And so, but because we don't talk about it, a lot of times, we suffer in silence. And so I'm very vocal about, number one, my whole story of my depression. And so what happened with me, I like to say I was I went through a season of a D life, right? So I was in debt. I was depressed because of the debt. I was going through a divorce. And then my mother-in-law at the time passed away. She died, should I say. And a little while after that, my own mom died. And so all those things, and I always say, when people talk about other people having suicidal ideations, we look at it, and I'm guilty also myself before my experience with it. We look at it from a space of, that's all you're dealing with or whatever, because a lot of times you only see the thing on the top, right?
Surface,
and so I say all the time, if it was just the debt, I could have handled that. If it was just divorce, I could handle that. If it was just the passing of my mom, I could handle that by itself. But when all those things came at the same time, then it was like, okay, it was just too much. And so I really was depressed and really kind of going through and just like, you know what? All these things that I can't control is like taking over my life. And I can't control any of it. I can't stop it. I can't, and so that's kind of where I was. And so I started having suicidal ideations, right? And I started thinking about taking my own life. And so when I talk about it, I'm very vocal about it, of course. And then when I talk about how I got through it, I tell people I got through it by having fun. And I'm a person that's big on acronyms. And so fun is FUN, right?
Yeah.
Fun. So it stands for focus, unite, and normalize. So with the focus, when I begin to focus on myself and all the things that I couldn't change, I couldn't control, those things, I was like, I felt hopeless and helpless because I couldn't control any of it. So I had to take the focus off myself. And so I put the focus on my daughter, because at that time, my daughter was probably like 7 or 8. And again, she had just lost both of her grandmothers. And my daughter is a daddy's girl. She's always been a daddy's girl.
Yeah.
So at that time, like I said, she was only 7 or 8. And so she was with me all the time. And so my thing was, I had to kind of talk to myself, like, what would happen to my daughter if I'm no longer here? And there would be days that I knew she was still dealing with her own grief and things like that, because there would be days when we'd be playing, and even in the midst of us playing, she would just stop and start crying. And I would say, what's wrong? What's going on? And she would say, I miss my grandmothers, because both of her grandmothers had passed, and she was still a little kid. And so my focus had to change, because I'm like, forget about what I'm dealing with. What would happen to her if I'm no longer here? And so I took the focus off myself and I began to focus on my daughter. And now with focus, because I've had this conversation with therapists on my show, excuse me, and on other people's show. And so sometimes they're like, well, we teach people to focus on yourself and keep the focus on yourself till you're able to deal with whatever you need to deal with. So I always make this disclaimer: whatever you have to focus on, whether it's focusing on you personally, or whether you put the focus on somewhere else, wherever you have to put the focus to get your mind off the helplessness and the hopelessness, then that's what you focus on. So for me personally, I had to take the focus off myself and put it on my daughter, right? And so that's the F for focus. So the U stands for unite. And so when my mother-in-law passed away, my mom passed away, I started going to bereavement counseling. And so I'm big on counseling. I'm big on therapy. I stand behind it, tell everyone, even if you think you don't need it, go anyway. You'll find out that you do. You know what I'm saying? And don't worry about people thinking you crazy, because we all a little crazy anyway. Don't worry about it. So, so I started going to bereavement and taking these bereavement group therapy, and it really helped me. It helped me a whole lot. And so what I learned in that space is you have to unite with people that understand what you're going through. So you have to be vocal about, this is what I'm dealing with. Let me find this community of people that's dealing with the same thing. And anything that you go through is somebody else that went through it. The Bible says there's nothing new under the sun. So there's nothing that you're going through personally that somebody else haven't already been through, and you just have to find that community. And so when I united with the people who was also going through grief from losing loved ones and being in that space really blessed me, to the point that even after my time was up, I stayed and became a volunteer. And I became a volunteer at the hospice. It was a hospice. I became a volunteer at the hospice with the bereavement program. And then I actually started a nonprofit organization named after my mom and my mother-in-law, who had both passed away. Phenomenal. My mother-in-law's name was Chris. My mom's name was Ann. So I named it Ann Christine Charities. And what I did was take bereavement to our communities, because while I was there, I would think I was there maybe a little over a year. And in that year's time, it was only like 2 African-American families that came through there, that came through the program. And I said, I know it's not because we're not dying, and I know it's not because we don't need it. And so I started the nonprofit, and I started taking it to the support groups and the bereavement to the community. And so that came out of that. And so, but that came from me uniting with like-minded people who understood what I was going through. And so the last one is Normalize, right?
Well, before you talk about that, I want to make sure I really highlight that, because you mentioned like that you saw there's just Black communities, that there are only a couple of them. And I feel like a lot of times there's this stigma associated with mental health and seeking out therapy or psychological, whatever it is in our communities. And I really love what you did establishing that nonprofit and really doing it to help our community, because I know, because I know you mentioned as far as struggling with depression, all these feelings. I know that's something I've struggled with. It's something, it comes and goes, and like I seek out the help that I need. But I think it's really crucial that you are having these conversations and helping people, because everything about this show is how people become the most incredible version of themselves. And you can't do that if you don't feel whole. You're not getting the help that you need. And I wanted to highlight that before you moved on to end.
Yeah, and you know what? So now the conversation is in the air now, right? And everybody's talking about therapy and getting the help that you need. Well, during this time period, this was like maybe 10 years ago, right? When I went through it and I started this. So this was before it became, mainstream, should I say, so now everybody's having the conversation in our communities now, excuse me. But back then, we weren't having the conversations, and that's why I was pressing so hard to do it. And I started the nonprofit because, we weren't having, like I said, I was there for over a year. As many families as I seen come and go because, dealing with grief of their loved ones, it was only 2 African-American families. And like I said, I knew it wasn't because we weren't dying. You know what I'm saying? Because I knew people were dying. I mean, we was in the church. Of course, as a church, as a community, of the families, there's people passing away, yet we weren't doing it. And even when I started it, we had a convention at our church. And so I presented for I did like a 3-day workshop, with the bereavement at the church. And I had like 12 to 20 people, that took part in the workshop at the church, and even their stories, people that I was talking to every day and every Sunday and didn't know their backstories. And some of them began to tell. One lady had, after we was done, she came up to me and she was like, "I'm mad at you." And I said, "Why are you mad at me?" She was like, "Because I thought I had healed from my son passing away, because one of her sons was killed. Actually, he had got killed, and she had other sons. And so when he got killed, she went into mommy mode to, really pour into her other sons, but she had never taken out the time to mourn herself. And so as we went through that, the workshop that I had put together, she was like, "You brought all these things back to me, where I was able to remember and grieve, because she had never taken out the time to grieve, And then there was another older woman whose husband had passed away some years before. And in the midst of it, us talking and we give the people a chance to talk. She began to talk, and she was like, "I have to admit, I'm angry, and she was like, "I'm angry at my husband because he left me. Like, you weren't supposed to leave me. You know what I mean? Like, we were supposed to go together or stay together, but you weren't supposed to leave me, and he passed away." And she's like, so it's a lot of times she felt alone after he passed, because again, not dealing with those emotions, not dealing with that grief. And so, it was something that I know is much needed and still much needed in our community, especially dealing with grief and bereavement. So I just really felt led at that time, and it was like, all right, I got to do this. And so I stepped out there and started the nonprofit, started doing that work.
That is so amazing. God's definitely using you in a great way. I can just tell where you're talking about the passion you have, that this is what you're called to do. It's amazing. But I know you were talking about the end for the normalize. What is that?
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So,
I took you off track. I'll bring you back.
So it wasn't that far off track because it's still in the same neighborhood. Yeah. So with the bereavement, when I was going through the bereavement, one of the terms that they talk about is your new normal, right? Because before your loved one passed away, like in my experience personally, it was my mom. So of course, I'm going to see my mom, every other weekend. Cause again, I live in a different state. So, I'm going to see my mom at least once a week. I'm calling. There's days when I'm off work, and I'm the kind of person that just pop up. Right. So I'll just drive out, to my mom's house and just pop up. Right. And so I'm doing that, and that's my normal. Well, when my mom passed away, now I'm not taking those trips no more. You know what I mean? Now, her phone number is still in my phone with her name. You know what I mean? And I'm not making those phone calls no more because there's nobody on the other end.
Yeah.
You know, so all those things start to, show themselves. It's like, well, this is your new normal. The new normal is your mom is not here. And so we have to come to the place where we are able to accept that and live with that and realize that, okay, even though this is a new normal, it still can be good. I still can have a great life. I still can, move forward and progress and be happy even with this person not physically being here. But I have to accept that this is my new normal now. And so when we go back to the acronym for fun is focus, unite, and normalize. And so those were the things that helped me able to get through my depression and my thoughts of my suicidal ideations at that time. So
I love that framework of shifting the focus. And I'm not a therapist either. I do coaching, but it's not really in the mental health space. But everything I know about coaches psychology is what you focus on grows. And if you're focusing on yourself and your issues, there's a tendency for that to grow bigger and bigger, and you can spiral. I'm sure there's ways to kind of manage it, but I love how you're intentional on focusing on your daughter and her needs, which obviously you'll focus on the needs you have as well to continue to function. But in those moments where you had that suicidal ideation, you were intentional on focusing on, okay, what does my daughter need in this moment? Because it's been really easy to focus on yourself and in that.
Yeah. And even with that, like you said, definitely focusing on myself for my needs. But I think where we get messed up at, which where I was at, is focusing on the things that you can't do anything about, those things. So I can wake up, God willing, I can wake up in the morning, I can wash my face, I can go outside and see the sunshine, let the sun shine on my face. All of those things are things that I can do, that I can actually have a part in changing. But the fact that I was going through a divorce, the divorce was going through that. I couldn't change that. My mother-in-law, who I was very close to, she passed away. She's not here no more. My mom's not here no more. The economy tanked, right? So I wasn't working. So I was in debt. I can't do nothing about that. All of those things I could not change. So I had to stop focusing on that and focus on the things that I could change. I could change how I operate on a day-to-day to make myself feel better in order to bring myself out of my depression. Like I said, get up, wash my face, go outside, let the sun shine on me, take a walk through nature, all of these things that I began to do, and as well as spending time with my daughter and focusing on, let me make sure she's okay. Let me make sure she's dealing with her grief in a positive way. Let me make sure that she still feels loved without the presence of her grandmothers. Those are things that I can do, that I can take, I can focus on. So let me focus on the things that I can change, that I can, make a difference in. And so when you start focusing on those things and not the tangibles that you can't do nothing about, then that's when you start able to move forward and kind of come out of that place. So that's what works for me. So that's why I tell everybody, even like I said, having this conversation with therapists, like I can't tell you how to do your job, right? Yeah. I can just tell you what worked for me. You know what I'm saying? So
exactly. And people are different, right? So that's trying to work for some people, but others it might not work. I know for myself that would not work for me. So it's just, and I think being a therapist, you kind of mold it to your client and what their needs are. So that's part of the job.
Yeah. Right. But I think like each person have to really find what works for them, and as long as if you're taking the journey, you're in the right direction because you'll find it out, you'll figure it out, but you got to be on the journey to even find it. And so when you step out and say, I want to do something about what I'm dealing with and not just soaking in the depression and the suicidal ideations, not just staying in that place, you start working to get out of it, you'll find what works for you. So
really being intentional. And that's a really key leadership trait, is not just letting life happen to you, which regardless of what you do, life's going to happen to you, but then you have to be intentional and respond to life, what is happening, instead of just reacting. Because there's a lot of things that happens. We can't control our circumstances. We can't control what people say about us, what people think about us. But we can control what we say or we respond to in the moment, and how we respond to it instead of just reacting.
Yeah. And you know what? I had this conversation recently, and it's at the place that I'm in now, right? So over the last 3 years, my life has changed a whole lot, with different things that I've been able to do. I've written a couple ebooks. I've started 2 podcasts. I've stepped into the speaking space as a professional speaker. And so all of those things has really happened in the last couple years. And where it came from was, again, I was going through some issues in my marriage. That's how I got into the fatherless daughter space. But I ended up getting a divorce. And we went through our divorce, but my ex-wife and I have been friends since kindergarten. We went to kindergarten together. So that's how long we've known each other. Right. And so when we were teenagers, we actually became each other's first boyfriend and girlfriend. So we've been friends our whole life.
Yeah.
And so we ended up getting the divorce. But one of the things we were adamant about is, okay, the marriage is ending, but we didn't want our friendship to end. And so we were very conscious on how we related with each other, how we operated with our family, with our children. And years later, now we're still very close friends. Our family is still tight. Her relationship with my daughter is awesome. My relationship with our sons is good. So, but coming out of that divorce, when you could look at it as divorce is a bad thing. But I often say, my divorce was the best thing that happened to me, right? At that time period, because it was from that led me into everything that I'm doing now, right? So I've learned to, in the space that I am now, especially growing up in the church, we always say, all things work for the good of those that love the Lord. But the thing is, it's all things, because we like to say all things, but then when something bad happens, it's like, it's like when something bad happens, like, well, clearly God is not in this, And so when I look at that, my divorce was a bad thing. My marriage ended. That was bad. But the things that came after that as a result of that has been amazing, And so now I really live in that space. Like, I don't even care what happens to me, because I know that it's working for my good. Good or bad, I know that God is working for my good. And so that's the space that I'm in now. And it's just like, okay, what is tomorrow going to bring? Good or bad, I know in the end, God is going to make it work for my benefit. And so I'm just like, all right, what's up, Earl? What you got for me today? You know what I mean? And so I think that's a space we have to get to, not just saying that, but actually believing it. Like all things, all things work for our good. And whether it's in the moment, whether it's good or bad, it doesn't make a difference, because in the end, it's all going to work for our good. Joseph couldn't be Joseph without his brothers throwing him in the pit. You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? They had to throw him in the pit for him to end up in Egypt, So that's all part of the story. So all things are working for our good.
Yeah, that's so critical that you mentioned that, because throughout life, and I talk about this all the time with rejection and failure and resilience, the only constant we have is that bad things are going to happen. That there's no one that goes through life and then everything is smooth sailing throughout their whole life. That's just, you're not human at that point. And so I think it's really critical you say that all things work together, like us people of faith. And if you're not a person of faith, that's fine, whatever you believe in. But what we're saying is that being intentional about when those bad things happen, think about, how can I get something good out of it? Because the situation might not be good. It might be terrible, but that doesn't mean you have to stay there and let it beat you down, have those suicidal ideations and end your life. There is a way to bounce back. There is a way to build back better, stronger. And it takes time. It takes intentionality, but there's a way to come back stronger than you were before. But you have to make that step, whether your framework, the focusing on the right things, uniting with people, and normalizing, creating your new normal. I think that's powerful.
Yeah, yeah. And I was going to say something. It kind of just went out my mind right before I said it. I forgot what I was going to say now.
You're
I know what I was going to say.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
You mentioned about the finding the good in everything, and so there's a law called the Law of Polarity. And basically what that means is there's nothing that's all good and there's nothing that's all bad. There's good and bad in everything, right? So there's no such thing as a one-sided coin. You know, there's no such thing as a one-sided piece of bread or a piece of paper. Everything has two sides, right? And so there's a story I heard about a farmer. And the farmer had a horse, and his neighbor came over to his house one day, and his horse ran away. And so the neighbor was like, "Oh man, you got bad luck," you know. And the farmer was just like, "Yeah, you know, it's good and it's bad, you know." And so the horse came back a couple weeks later with another female horse. Right. And it was like, "Oh, you got good luck. You know, your horse came back with another horse." And the farmer was like, "You know, it's good and bad." Right. And so the farmer had a son, and his son was trying to tame the wild horse that came back with their horse. And the horse bucked him off. He fell and broke his arm. And the neighbor said, "Oh man, you got bad luck." But then they had a war, and a draft came, and they were taking all the sons to go to war. But because his son's arm was broke, they didn't take him. He got to stay home. So the neighbor was like, "Oh, you got good luck." And so the moral of the story, there's good and bad in everything, no matter what happens. You know, even the things that you think is good, there's some bad in it. Even the things that you think is bad, there's some good in it. You just have to be able to look for it, you know. And so we have no problem finding the good in the good things, but we have to train ourselves to always look for the good in the bad things too, because there's always good in it.
That's so true. To find the good in the bad things. I love that story too, because with getting a broken arm, you would think that's not good, but it caused him to stay at home.
Yeah, it's better than going to war, right?
Yeah, exactly. But we are about out of time. It really flew by. I love getting to know about you and your story. Well, I want to make sure I give you time to share about how people can connect with you. Talk about your podcast. Definitely share them again, how people can watch that, where you are in your socials, websites, all of that.
Yeah. So first of all, let me say thank you for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity to be on. Again, my name is Earnest James. You guys can find me at the Deal to Heal podcast, or should I say Deal to Heal with E. James podcast, as well as the Girl Dad Discussions podcast. You can find me on all of your podcast listening platforms, as well as on YouTube. So if you look us up on YouTube under the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast, you will find the podcast for Deal to Heal with E. James podcast, as well as the Girl Dad Discussions podcast. So definitely want you guys to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And also, like I said, I have some other podcasts that's coming up. So those will be on that same channel. So you want to definitely check those out. One of the other things that I'm really proud about is I've written several ebooks, right? And so this one here, I'm going to show this one. It's called The 4 Core, which is the 4 core values that every daughter should get from her father. And we talk about the core values that, again, I learned from watching my father's relationship with my 5 sisters, watching my relationship with the fatherless daughters that I dated, and then also my relationship with my own daughter. I was able to pull out the 4 core values that every daughter needs to get from her father, right? And also I have written another ebook. This one is called From Males to Men, which is a male mentoring book that I kind of wrote out of my mentoring program, right? And so I would say that you being a male was God's decision. You had nothing to do with that. But you becoming a man is going to be your decision.
Wow.
Right? So the things that you do and the responsibility that you take, and the respect that you have is what makes you a man. And so those 2 ebooks are available at ebooksbyejames.com. I made that real simple. ebooksbyejames.com. You can find all my other ebooks. I have several others. But those are there, ebooksbyejames.com. And if you forget everything, just remember dealhealfulfill.org. dealhealfulfill.org. You go there and you can find out more about me and the podcast, as well as the links to my ebooks and to my inspirational shirt line, Deal to Heal Tees. All of that is there at dealhealfulfill.org, because my mission is to help people to deal, heal, and fulfill, to deal with your problems, to heal from your pain, and to fulfill your purpose. And that's me. I'm Ernest James. Thanks for having me.
I love it. So amazing. So inspiring. For those of you watching, you already saw it come across the screen. If you're listening, you can go in the show notes if you need to see it. All the links are there. You are an incredible man, Ernest. All the stuff that you do. It has been truly an honor having you on the podcast. For everyone listening, I hope you got something from Ernest's story, from all he has been through, what he's helping people through as well, to deal, heal, and fulfill, and become the most incredible versions of themselves. Thank you for listening.
Be sure to rate and review this podcast on your favorite podcast listening platform. We'll see you here next time. And be incredible.